The Allen Lund Company continues to support the owner-operators of OOIDA. Thank you for what you do and stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Employment history is a tricky thing for anyone, but especially in trucking. And because of that, something from a past job could have an impact on whether you get a future job. I'll find out how it works and what you can do from David Grimes of CDL Legal. Also on today's program, the Budget Reconciliation Bill making its way through Congress contains a number of provisions that are not favorable to truckers. I'll discuss what those are with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today, a lack of truck parking may have played a role in yet another deadly crash. This time it happened in Virginia. State police there say a passenger vehicle was traveling southbound on Interstate 95 near Ladysmith when it collided with a tractor-trailer that was parked on the shoulder. The driver of the passenger vehicle was killed. Virginia State Police say the 54-year-old trucker will be charged with improper stopping. It's just the latest deadly crash involving a semi stopped off the side of a highway. The National Transportation Safety Board last week releasing a final report into a deadly 2023 crash in Illinois, during which a Greyhound bus slammed into semis that were parked on a highway off-ramp. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy spent some time during a recent board meeting discussing the accident, the truck parking crisis, and a bill in Congress that would help alleviate the problem.
The NTSB doesn't usually weigh in on the need for congressional funding for specific programs. So I do think this is a big deal, and I do think it is much needed. We mentioned throughout the docket, previous legislation, H.R. 2367, it's now H.R. 1659, which was introduced by Congressman Mike Bost from Illinois. It's a piece of bipartisan legislation that he's working to push on providing specific funding for constructing safety for rest areas to include parking for commercial motor vehicle drivers. So you have a situation where you have tired drivers. And so, it does cost money to, improve rest areas, and there is federal funding, but these federal funding programs, whether it's federal aid highway funding programs like the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program or National Highway Freight Program or the National Highway Performance Program, or its discretionary grant opportunities like the mega grants and several others that have been authorized, there's competing priorities and needs at the state level. And you're essentially choosing between efficiency and safety, or one safety project over another safety project. And so what the legislation does, that is mentioned in at least one or two parts of our docket, which I thought was excellent, write-up, was the need to have a specific grant program for commercial motor vehicle facilities to allow parking to address rest, because it is a problem. You have and again, I understand that these three trucks were parked illegally, but the choice is, do you continue to drive fatigued? That's not a good choice. So we do have to we do have to provide more funding to improve existing rest areas, to build new ones.
Congressman Bost's bill, the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, continues to pick up bipartisan support in the House. At last check, 40 members of Congress have signed on as co-sponsors. To make sure your elected rep is one of them, check out fightingfortruckers.com. The state of New York scored a win on Tuesday in its bid to keep congestion tolling in place, for now at least. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority had asked a U.S. District Court to temporarily prevent the Trump administration from withholding federal approvals and funds for state transportation projects. Bloomberg reports that a judge granted that request on Tuesday. That means a congestion tolling program will likely continue while the legal process plays out. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy told CBS News earlier this year that he's not opposed to congestion pricing plans. He just wants the issue studied more.
The American taxpayer, the New York taxpayer, funded those streets. And the way the governor set this up is, she said, even though you already paid for these streets, you can't use those streets unless you pay an additional toll. Well, if I'm the taxpayer, I'm like, I already paid for the street. Why am I paying an additional toll to the taxes I already paid? There's no free pathway into that cordoned area, right? So if you're a middle income or a lower income shopper or worker, you can't access public roads by any means into this area. That's flat out wrong. And we've never had a program like that where there's not a free public road to get in to a certain area.
That's especially true of commercial truck drivers who have little control over their schedules or routes. Under the current congestion pricing plan in New York City, truckers driving a multi-unit truck with an easy pass are charged more than $21 during the peak period each time they enter the congestion pricing zone with no daily cap. Oklahoma is one step away from instituting strict requirements for non-domiciled CDL holders. The State House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed the Oklahoma Secure Roads and Safe Trucking Act of 2025 late last week. The bill now sits on Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt's desk, and he's widely expected to sign it into law. If and when that happens, drivers who hold CDLs from other countries would be forbidden from operating in the state of Oklahoma if they don't have a valid work visa and can't present proof of citizenship documents from the country that issued their CDL. Violators would face up to 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. The legislation also has other provisions, including one that imposes English language requirements on commercial drivers, one that mirrors the executive order signed by President Trump last month. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, at an event last week in Austin, Texas, dedicated to the English proficiency issue, told Landline that this is just the first step towards shoring up regulations that are either on the books and not being enforced, or adding additional ones.
Yeah, so this one was actually relatively easy in the sense that we're able to roll back the rule that Obama put into place and actually, make it a consequence of, taking a driver out of service, a truck out of service, if they can't speak English. This one was a pretty straight path forward. These other issues get to be more complicated, and the issue is not complicated. How you fix the issue becomes more complicated. It's not as simple as what we did here today. And so when you do this, you want to do it right. You want to make sure the change that you make is lasting and has a true impact.
The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, at the urging of OOIDA, recently adopted changes to its standards that make a lack of English proficiency an out-of-service violation. That change goes into effect at the end of June. A bill floating around the Michigan State House would ban trucks from using the far-left lanes of highways. The rule would apply to roadways with 3 or more lanes. Some exceptions would apply for hazards in the roadway or for lane closures. But widely speaking, any vehicle weighing more than 10,000 pounds would be barred from using the left lane. Michigan House Bill 4522 was introduced last week and will be considered by the legislature's Transportation Committee. The bill text does not give a reason for imposing such a restriction, but does say fines would be handed out for violations. And finally, truckers traveling State Route 46 through the central coast of California are probably going to spend a little time at a new enforcement facility that just opened up. It's in San Luis Obispo County. The California Highway Patrol says the facility gives inspectors and drivers a safe space for inspections. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. The problem of freight fraud takes many forms. Double brokering and stealing a carrier's authority being just 2 examples, and many truckers have been victims. But the issue has the attention of Congress, where 2 bills, S-337 in the Senate and H.R. 880 in the House, would enable FMCSA to do something to combat the problem. Show your support by calling 202-224-3121 or by going to fightingfortruckers.com. Next, I'll discuss how your employment history can follow you with David Grimes of CDL Legal. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Employment history is a tricky thing for anyone, but in trucking, things happen in regard to your employment history that might never happen to people in another field. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Rettig. Welcome back to the program. Truckers' history is tracked in several ways by the federal government, and the same is true of state governments. What's more, there are services out there that provide information about truckers to carriers, brokers, and others. When you're looking for another job in the trucking industry, it's a good idea to know what's on all of those outlets, although some are harder to access than others. But sometimes, even if you do, there's something from a previous employer that's going to follow you and could cause problems as you search for work. That's why I spoke recently about the issue with David Grimes of CDL Legal. Well, our topic today is what a trucker can do about something that happened at a previous job. And I guess we ought to start with what sorts of things are we talking about?
Yes. So there can be a lot of things that come up unexpectedly. Drivers tend to move. It's not completely common, but drivers tend to move from carrier to carrier. And so in the course of a few years, or just in the course of a career, you're going to have worked for quite a few different people. So there are things that can come back to haunt you, and they can come from a lot of different sources, mostly because drivers are using their same driving record as their seal of approval, basically, to continue to move and advance through their careers. So anything that affects that driving record or something in their driving history may be coming back to haunt them later on.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of these. The first one is court summons for crash responsibility. That's one that you listed as one of these situations. In layman's terms, what do we mean by that?
So I'll give you an example. I spoke with a driver just earlier this week who received a big old packet at his house. His wife, picked it up at the mailbox and flipped through it, and it was pages on pages on pages of legal jargon. What is going on? He's on the road. She's calling him. He's calling me. And when I got a look at the documents, it looked like what had happened was an insurance company and the person that they insure were filing a civil lawsuit against this driver and the driver's carrier at the time, which was 2 years ago, that came from a crash that he had been involved in, and he was ruled not at fault, but the person that he hit was trying to sue him anyway. And this is, we hear horror stories about this, about nuclear verdicts and things like that, where someone will get into a wreck with a CMV and then decide, okay, now I can get enough money to set myself up for life. I'm going to squeeze this company and this driver for all they're worth. So that is maybe the most dramatic thing that can happen, but it is something that does happen to drivers probably every single day across the country. Is they will get something, some sort of legal summons that says, you've been called to court. In relation to this case, this person is, and this company is suing you and, this company that you used to work for.
I would think that they did take care of what I would think is the first step, which is get a good lawyer. I mean, that's going to be necessary, right?
If I were in their position, I would be running in that direction immediately. And we do, our company doesn't necessarily work with these types of cases, but we have encountered them enough to where we've built up some referral options to attorneys who do defense for carriers and for truckers. And I've had the opportunity to talk with a few of them just over time. Every single one that I've spoken to is extremely passionate about defending drivers and defending carriers against these civil lawsuits where someone is basically just trying to squeeze them out of their livelihood, or in the case of a company, trying to squeeze them out of business for no other reason than they think that they're an easy target.
I want to go back to something you said when you were talking about one particular example. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that this driver was already found not to be at fault. Have I got that right?
That is the story as I understood it when I was talking with him about this. I didn't actually see the crash report or anything like that. But from what he told me, yes, it was an unavoidable accident. He came around a blind curve. There was someone who had already been in a crash, whose car was in the middle of the lane, and he couldn't slow down enough in time and hit the car. It doesn't really matter exactly the circumstances. You can pretty much file a civil lawsuit against anyone you like. Now, whether or not it's going to go anywhere is something else, but that's up for the attorneys to decide. And if you don't work for the carrier that is included with you as the defendant in a lawsuit, it would probably be a good idea to reach back out to them and see what their legal team is doing, as well as reaching out to independent counsel to see what advice they might give you.
Well, and I think the question a lot of people listening to this are probably going to be thinking is, if they're, and let's take it a little bit out of your example and speak a little bit hypothetically, but if a court said this trucker is not at fault, that doesn't mean that you're going to win the case, does it?
It means,
I mean, I've heard of cases where that actually happened.
Yeah, all of the attorneys that I was telling you that I've spoken to over time are all clamoring in my head saying, "Don't give legal advice." But the long and short of it is that civil cases are rarely cut and dry, and they're rarely about what did or didn't happen. Oftentimes, there's some sort of messy gray area where the plaintiff, the person who is bringing the case against you, they may not get everything that they were swinging for in the first place, but that's not often their goal or their attorney's goal. It's usually just to get as much out of you as they can possibly claw. And the short answer is that if you are implicated, if you're pulled into a case like this where it's a civil case and you're the defendant and someone is trying to sue you related to something that happened years ago, first thing you should do is contact an attorney who defends truckers and trucking companies in cases like this. They will know what to do, they will know what to go look for, and they will know the best avenue to help you with it.
And something else, and just to let you know, I'm not going to go into the legal advice area, but more kind of the definition. You mentioned these are civil cases, and most people are familiar with the standard for a criminal case, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. But in these, I've served on a couple of juries. I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, based on the judge's instructions I saw in a couple of cases, is it more likely than not? I think the legal term is the preponderance of evidence, but that is the standard, isn't it? So they just have to prove it's a little more likely than not in order to win that case.
Mm-hmm. And I think the crux of the question is the word win. Win the case can mean a lot of different things. And it can mean that they get everything that they're after, or you get off scot-free, or it can just mean that they get a plea agreement to settle out of court, so to speak, aka to settle before a trial. And that might be something that, I'm sorry. I'm already getting caught in my own jargon here. Basically, what I mean is that that there can, be some sort of settlement out of court where you still might have to pay up more money than is fair just to make this go away. An attorney can help. That is absolutely the first direction I would point someone. And that's what I did for our customer earlier this week. He came to me. Once I realized what was happening, I immediately sent him to one of those attorneys that we typically refer people to, knowing that he would be in good hands.
We're talking again about things that can follow you from a previous job. And this is one we have not talked about for a long time on the program, but it's been a huge issue in the past. And that is a DAC report in showing a bad employer review. And I always feel like, DAC has been owned by several companies in my tenure here. Can you explain for folks who are newer to the industry what DAC is and how it is used?
Yes. So the DAC report is just kind of the common terminology for a driver's history of employment. And it's not held by a federal or a state organization. There's not really a whole lot about it that is held by the government. It's just a record of employment, and it can include those other factors. As a matter of fact, I've run across a few different versions of what would be called a DAC report. DAC, by the way, is just an acronym that means drive a check, which is just a silly phrase. But basically what it's being used for is similar to a PSP, a pre-employment screening program. It's the driver's history for a little bit of time, and it's used by potential employers to weed out drivers that they wouldn't want to hire. Here's the problem. Because it is not an official government record, an employer, a carrier, can add things to that record by themselves without running it through a legal system first. AKA, they can slander you if you make them mad walking out the door. So the companies that hold the DAC record have a vested interest in it being accurate. So they have their own programs or methods for making sure that corrections get made to the DAC. You can go to them, you can say, hey, what's on my DAC is inaccurate. My last boss got really mad at me and he put all this stuff on there that wasn't true. Let me show you. And so normally in the normal process, they will allow you to make those corrections and you can clean up your DAC, so to speak. But that's the main thing that you have to watch out for, is that if there was some misunderstanding, if there was some heightened emotion, if, just whatever, a mistake, then you can have a landmine waiting on your record for you to walk into your next job and for it to explode right in your face and you not be able to get that position because of something there.
As I understand it, you mentioned that this is a private company. Do you have an ability to actually get and see what is on your DAC report?
Yes. So just like carriers are pulling the DAC report to look at potential new hires, drivers also have the ability to do this. Probably the best, quickest way is to go on the website. Now, the name of the company that holds it currently is HireRight. It's sort of all one word, hire and then right as in turn right. And so their website is the best way to go and get a copy, or you can just reach out to them probably by phone. So yes, it can be done, and it would probably be worthwhile, especially after you leave a company. Maybe give it a month or so and go pull a copy just to make sure, just as a little checkup, that everything looks clear on there.
I've been talking with David Grimes of CDL Legal, a legal service provider for the trucking industry, about things that happened at a previous trucking job and how it can affect you as you look for a new job. We'll be back with more on this topic from David after a short commercial break. But in the meantime, you can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836, and the website is cdllegal.com. And you can find all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page, and you can find all those links. We'll be back in just a moment with more of this conversation with David Grimes. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with David Grimes of CDL Legal about things that happened at a previous trucking job and how it can affect you as you look for another job. We were discussing information about DAC reports, and we now continue that conversation in progress. And I'm sure this doesn't require too much in the way of clarification here, but some of these matters may involve something that maybe went to court. I don't know. I mean, that's not as common on DAC. But if it does a court decision of no fault or a court decision in your favor necessarily change anything on that DAC report?
It should, but only because those court decisions are influencing the government records that the DAC is copying, if that makes sense. So the DAC is just pulling information from government sources, and those government sources should, in theory, be accurate to what you fought for in court. So the court is reporting to your MVR, possibly if you're doing stuff with the DOT, that's reporting to your PSP, and then those two records are running into the DAC, and the DAC is just saying what they said.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the PSP, and I think that's really a good subject here that you had mentioned earlier. The pre-employment screening program. Now, DAC is not government run. PSP is. But it's part of the whole SMS, CSA, many initials situation. Can you kind of explain when we're saying PSP, SMS, CSA, what those each are and how they kind of work together?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a lot going on. And it is so Byzantine and can be really, really frustrating for a driver who has to interact with it only only when it's causing a problem for him. Normally, drivers really don't have to think about this very hard. They get inspection reports from weigh stations and things like that, and those are reported up to the federal government, and the version of the federal record that applies just to a driver, so just to you, is called your PSP. So basically, any inspections that you get specifically, whether they're clean or not, any crashes that you're involved in that are serious enough to be reported, aka if somebody had to be taken to the hospital or somebody got a tow, and if it was on a public street and not in somebody's parking lot. So all of those, or a private yard is what I mean, not exactly parking lot. So all of those things are going to run up onto your PSP, and that PSP will last for 3 years. So from now until exactly 3 years ago, my PSP record is showing all of those crashes and inspections that I was involved with. And then, it's showing all the inspections. For the crashes, it actually goes back 5 years, a little bit further. And the whole purpose of that record is to show, again, it's called PSP Pre-Employment Screening Program. It's to show someone who wants to hire you what your record looks like.
And of course, for folks that are on their own authority, and that is a lot of folks who listen to the show, that's where the CSA comes in.
Right. So another acronym, what is going on here? Basically, your PSP, if you're just a driver and you're building up this record, clean inspections with a little ding here, a little violation there, no problem. So you don't have to worry about any sort of penalties within that system for the PSP. But a carrier does have to worry about that. If a carrier has an operating authority, then their version of that score includes every driver that's driving under them and under that DOT number, and it has a penalty system called the CSA or SMS. Basically, the federal government will start to penalize carriers if they build up too many violations. If you run under your own authority, you are the carrier, and you have to worry about that as well.
So let's get back to our original premise here. If a bad inspection from a previous employer shows up on your PSP, what is the first thing you need to do if you're facing that situation?
So the very first thing you should do is you should read through it very carefully. If the violations are there and you think any of them are incorrect, then you can try to make what's called a data queue challenge, which is basically a request for correcting the record. And if you got a ticket with any of those violations and you won that ticket in court, just like we were talking about earlier, you can make a change to the record, and that record should, or that change should sort of ripple outwards to show that correction was made. So if you don't see that correction, or if you haven't made any sort of try to make a correction and you think one could be done, that should be your first course of action, because no one is going to go and do that work except for you. You are the one who cares about your PSP. If you have a previous carrier, they might be working on it, but you can't guarantee that, and you can go and do that yourself.
One thing about data queue that I've talked with people about in the past, and possibly even with you and your colleagues, is if you don't have a ticket, if you're just looking at an inspection report. And I've always heard that it becomes much more difficult to use a data queue to get something off in that situation. Why is that?
Well, people have a perception of data queue that it's like going to court. It's like fighting a ticket. And that's not really accurate. Most of the time when you're fighting in court, you're fighting a ticket, you're fighting something that was bad enough that an officer stopped you and said, hey, this is dangerous, you're breaking a serious law, and so you're going to have to go and deal with the consequences of that. Data queues and the things that they are about can vary widely. They don't have to be something as serious as speeding in a school zone while, little parents and their kids were strolling, down across the road. It can be something like having a taillight out, or something like having your fire extinguisher not secured properly, or something like you had a glitch in your ELD and for whatever reason your logs for yesterday are weird. The whole process, or the whole system, is meant to show every single little thing that can go wrong, not for the purposes of penalizing you necessarily, but for the purposes of just trying to make things a little bit better, one tiny correction at a time. Where does data queue come into that? Well, because the DOT has that view of their whole system and all the violations on it, they are not nearly as willing to make changes based on data queue challenges to anything on the record. They're like, why would we change it? It's a thing that happened. Your fire extinguisher was rolling around underneath the seat. How can you say different? So the DOT requires that in a data queue challenge, in order for it to be successful, you have to prove, and not beyond a reasonable doubt, not with a preponderance of evidence, but really, really prove for sure that their officer who was writing the inspection was wrong, that he saw something and misunderstood it, or that he wrote something down that was just totally factually incorrect, and that you can prove it. So there it is. You've got to prove that the violation showing up on your PSP is totally incorrect. Now, how do court cases interact with this? Well, if you win a ticket in court and the judge signs off on a change or a dismissal of the ticket, then that can stand in place of evidence. Most of the time. That's a whole different conversation as to what the DOT will and will not accept from judges in their courts. But that's how tickets and running things through court interact with your PSP.
So kind of going back to the whole CSA, SMS, PSP thing, I know in some instances, and I believe it's in CSA, if you end up getting more good inspections, it will bring your overall score up. It'll make it better, I should say. Is that the case with PSP, or does that even make a difference to a potential employer who sees that bad inspection on the PSP?
That's a good question. I can't speak for the potential employer because the PSP doesn't have that penalty system. It doesn't have points or anything like that. So the only way that it can help or harm you is only based on the perception of the person who's reviewing it. The person who's in the hiring chair and looks at your PSP and says, yeah, we'll take this guy, or no, I don't like the look of this. So yes, can clean inspections help you on the PSP? They can, but it is much less about an actual number going up or down and much more about how that improves the perception that the PSP gives to the person who is doing the hiring. More clean inspections more recently should show that your recent driving has been excellent. And hopefully that gets you in the door.
One thing I wanted to go back to, and something you said earlier, you mentioned that certain things will come off your PSP in 3 years. Some things will come off in 5 years. But one of the things that I've run into with some truckers is when it comes off one form of your records, it may not come off another. For example, points on your license. And I just want to confirm that's pretty much the case, or is something else the case with all these different records that are tracking you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so things can stay on a version of the record even if they go off another one. And that is sort of the kind of the anchor that drivers have to carry around, is that some things will stay on your record forever. That's why it's so critical to fight a ticket right away and not just pay it and forget about it. Why it's so critical to fight something on your PSP and try to make that data queue challenge right away when you can gather enough evidence and not wait until a year later when it's, a long time past and, suddenly it's affecting me. What can I do? The sooner you can react to something that might negatively affect your record, the better chance you have of making a difference there, and for it to be not a black mark on your record going further in time. As far as point systems and the way that they hurt you over time, to try to break it down, your MVR, which is your driver's license record, carries everything for all time. But with some exceptions, it only really affects you in a sense that the government will penalize you within the first probably 3 years. Everything older than 3 years, more or less, is okay in that the government won't come and say, you've gotten this many tickets, we're canceling your Class A. Obviously, the perception of the person in the hiring chair will always be what it is. PSP, 3 years, and then it's gone. That's the saving grace. They're way, way harder to do anything about, those violations on the PSP. But after 3 years, they're gone. You don't have to deal with them at all, ever. They vanish. No one can see them. And then like if you have a CSA score, if you're looking at a DAC, those things are also, kind of interact with one another. The DAC, depending on what information is drawing from, your employment history can technically be for as long as you've been employed. Whoever is manually reporting things to the DAC, it will stay there.
David, thank you very much for the information.
Thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with David Grimes of CDL Legal, a legal service provider for the trucking industry, about things that happen at a previous trucking job and how it can affect you as you look for a new trucking job. In the meanwhile, you can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836, and the website is cdllegal.com. And you can find all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page, and that's where you'll find all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention here on the show. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Protect your diesel engine with Howe's Diesel Defender. Restore vital lubricity, eliminate injector deposits, and boost fuel economy by 5% or more. Power, performance, protection, all in one. Howe's Diesel Defender, available now.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline now. Welcome back. A lot has been said and debated about what's being called the budget reconciliation package that's currently making its way through Congress. However, what many may not know is that the bill contains a number of provisions that are not favorable to truck drivers. Here to explain is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how you doing?
I'm good, Mark. How about yourself?
Very well. Let's start with just kind of an overall on this bill. What is the actual purpose of this bill? Because I think a lot of that gets lost in all the particulars that are being discussed.
Yes. And so this bill is the large, and kind of the technical term is the reconciliation package that congressional Republicans and President Trump are working to move through Congress and to sign into law to, very broadly speaking, reform the tax code, bring about tax changes, and ultimately, implement some tax cuts. So reconciliation process, it gets really complicated. You can get way into the weeds, but the short version is that it's only supposed to include policy that affects either spending or revenues. So the only sort of policy that can be in this bill are policies that increase revenue to the government or increase spending that the government does. And that allows Congress to unlock this expedited process to pass the bill where they only need a majority in each chamber of Congress, in the House and Senate. And if I'm sure folks will remember, at least some will remember, back in 2017 when Congress went through and passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that made tax changes. That's the same process that they used then to do that. So that is the big picture of what's going on in Congress right now.
Now, some people may be assuming from this conversation that OOIDA opposes basically the whole bill, but you've said that is not the case, that the association is concerned about some very specific particulars contained in this bill. What is the association concerned about?
Yeah, again, and I'll just reiterate, we're not telling, congressional Republicans or the president they shouldn't go through and cut taxes or anything like that. That is absolutely not what we're saying. Our concern is that there are three specific provisions really that affect small business truckers as well as professional drivers that unfortunately make things a little more difficult, or make the profession or make the job a little bit less attractive. And these are things that we've been talking about, two of them at least, talking about for a while. The one is that we've talked about for quite a while is restoring the per diem deduction for employee drivers. That deduction for employees was eliminated as part of the previous tax cuts that I just mentioned, and we've been telling Congress you need to restore that because some drivers really lost out when that was eliminated. The other issue that we've been talking about for a while has to do with overtime for truck drivers. As part of the reconciliation package, Republicans are exempting overtime wages from taxes. So this is in line with President Trump's no taxes on overtime pledge. But the issue is two issues, really. First is that truckers are not guaranteed overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So very often drivers are not getting overtime. And so if you're not getting overtime, you're not going to get tax-free overtime. But even worse for other drivers is that if you are working for a carrier where you are getting overtime pay, the bill still would not make those overtime wages tax-free. In other words, the bill says your wages are tax-free if you qualify for overtime under existing law. So truck drivers don't qualify under existing law. So even though you might be getting those overtime wages, you still would not be exempted from taxes under the bill. So that's the second item. And again, something we've been telling lawmakers for a while. The last thing, and this is something that came up more recently, but in short, it's a new $100 annual fee that would fall on small motor carriers to access a system that basically gives a red light or green light about whether they're able to operate. And trying not to get too much into the details, but basically this was done as part of a way to provide brokers some liability protections. Congress is standing up a new system to say, brokers, here's a system, a website that you're going to check. And if you check to make sure that your carrier you're working with has a green light, you'll get some liability protections. The issue that we have with that is, as part of the reconciliation package, there's a $100 fee every year to access and use that system. So carriers, if you want to check if you've got that green light, you're going to need to pay for that. So we've told Congress that is just at a time when they're trying to cut taxes and reduce fees, that program's going in the wrong direction.
Well, and to be clear, that fee is getting you access, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but access to information that's public information right now that truckers can access without paying a fee.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other really big concern is if that information's already out there, why do you need to set up a second system essentially behind a paywall? And that's what we've told Republicans. That's what we've been telling lawmakers is that, we're not opposed to a policy of making sure that only, if a carrier is unsafe to operate, we don't want them to be operating either. But it shouldn't be done in this way that forces carriers to pay for it, and especially not to pay for information that's basically duplicative of what's already publicly available.
I want to go back to the per diem because that's one that really smarted when it came through a couple of years ago. The plan at the time was that the new higher standard deduction would make up for the loss of any other individual deductions people had. Mm-hmm. But did that work out with the per diem? Because that would surprise me.
Yeah, not for old drivers, certainly not for old drivers, especially when you consider drivers are somewhere out on the road 200, 250, 300 nights a year. If you were taking that per diem a lot, it really added up, and it did not, the new standard deduction did not make up for that loss in the per diem. So what we've have been telling the lawmakers is that it's a unique case, or certainly not a very common case for people who are making so much use of this deduction. But unfortunately, I think what has happened here is that there was just not really an appetite from Republicans to revisit or kind of open up some of these changes that were made as part of the last tax reform, and they're hesitant to do anything that would be seen, or at least they say, kind of reopening or recomplicating the tax code. So we have relayed the message numerous times that it was bad for certainly at least some employee drivers who use this a lot.
Well, and I talked to drivers that have had as much as a $20,000 or even more of a deduction from the per diem. And to be clear, owner-operators still have this. This was eliminated only for company drivers.
Yes, that's correct. And that's, as we were talking to lawmakers, we said certainly restore the employee per diem, but at a bare minimum, leave it in place for owner-operators, which they did. They have not touched it for owner-operators, but you are right.
Okay. And kind of going back to this $100 fee.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that strikes me is one of the purposes of this bill was to reduce taxes. Doesn't this essentially amount to an additional tax on the people paying that fee?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's how we view it. We understand the intent of this. We know that there's been an effort to kind of provide some of this liability protection for brokers. And the $100 fee, as best we can understand it, is kind of that reconciliation hook. If you think back to the beginning when I was describing what's allowed to be in a reconciliation bill, it has to either impact spending or revenue. So by including this $100 fee, it's affecting revenue. And I think that's how Congress is trying to push this policy through. So it's unfortunate that that's gotten included as part of this reconciliation bill. And that's what we've been telling Congress is, despite the idea that it might be voluntary for carriers who just want to check on this, carriers are going to feel compelled to do so, because if there's bad information out there about you, you're going to want to know about it.
Okay. Well, Bryce, a lot more we could talk about here, but we've run out of time. I want to thank you very much for all the information.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, if you want to call your members of Congress about the important issues that we discuss here on the show, you can get a hold of them two ways, at 202-224-3121 or through the website fightingfortruckers.com. That's our program for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.